There comes a moment in life when you realize that what once defined you no longer holds the same weight. It's not a crisis, it's more like a kind of awakening. And although it's rarely talked about, many women at this stage feel emotionally unanchored, as if they're floating between who they were and who they're yet to discover they can be. But what if I told you that right there in the midst of all that emotional mess lies the beginning of your deepest freedom? It's not that you've lost your ability to feel, it's just that, for years, many of us learnt to filter our emotions to fit in, to be accepted, to avoid rocking the boat. We became experts at measuring our words, swallowing our pain, pretending everything was fine. But now your body begins to change, and with it, so does your heart. What you once tolerated now feels heavy. What you used to ignore now cuts right through you, because you no longer have the energy to pretend. And as uncomfortable as that may be, it's a sign of growth. What people don't say enough is that menopause doesn't just strip away your hormones, it shakes up your emotional foundations. Maybe you suddenly see that you've spent years in a relationship that no longer fulfills you. Or perhaps you realize you've never learned how to be alone without guilt. Many of us were taught that self-love was a luxury, something to consider after you'd looked after everyone else. But what happens when your body starts screaming that the time is now, that you can't afford to keep putting yourself last? And of course, with this phase come the judgments, both external and internal. You start to wonder if you're still allowed to fall in love, to crave connection, to start over. You ask yourself whether you're too old for certain things, but the truth is, nothing ages you faster than living for the gaze of others. Reclaiming your emotional life doesn't have to look like it did before. In fact, it has every right to be something entirely new, freer, more honest, and entirely yours. Speaking of freedom, there's a very specific kind that begins to bloom right now: emotional freedom. It's not about numbing your feelings, it's about allowing yourself to feel without fear of judgment, to cry without it making you weak, to say, "This hurts, this excites me, this no longer serves me," without having to explain yourself. Because after everything you've been through, the very least you deserve is to be true to yourself, even if it's uncomfortable, even if it shakes up relationships, even if it leaves you alone for a while. Because there's no rebirth without discomfort, and no freedom without brave choices. Many women feel guilty for wanting more, for desiring passion, connection, depth, as if fulfillment were reserved for the young. But fulfillment doesn't come with age, it comes with intention. And at this point in life, you're no longer looking for perfection or empty promises. You're looking for authenticity, for people you can be unfiltered around, for spaces where your voice isn't just heard, it's valued, for love that lets you breathe, not suffocates you. And that starts with you, with refusing to settle, with no longer making excuses for things that no longer resonate. Sometimes reclaiming your emotional life means unlearning old beliefs. That older women shouldn't feel lonely, that they should just be grateful for what they have, that they're past the age of exploration. Who made up those rules? And why are we still following them? The more you let go of those ideas, the lighter everything becomes. It's no longer about having all the answers, but about asking the right questions. What do I need today? What excites me? What dims my light? What ignites it? And yes, maybe right now you struggle to name what you're feeling. Maybe there are days when you're gripped by a sadness that seems to come from nowhere, a rage you can't trace, or a wave of nostalgia that catches you off guard. You're not losing your mind. You're coming home to yourself. You're reconnecting with parts of you that were left behind while you were busy surviving. And that's not something you fix with quick tips or pretty phrases. It's something you go through, something you live, something you honor. Because emotional life, when lived with awareness, isn't always comfortable, but it's always real, and that's where true rebirth begins. We were often told that emotional healing was just a matter of thinking positively or putting on a brave face. But the truth is, there's nothing more toxic than denying what we feel just because it doesn't fit with what's expected of us. What if today, for the first time, you decided to stop apologizing for feeling too much? Because feeling too much is also a way of being alive, even when it hurts, even when it's confusing. At this stage, many women face the paradox of having more emotional clarity and at the same time less tolerance for emotional strain. You stop putting up with things you used to keep quiet about, not because you've become difficult, but because you've learned to listen to yourself. And yes, that unsettles those who were used to the more accommodating version of you. But you're not being selfish, you're being honest. You're saying, I matter too, and that is priceless. One thing hardly anyone says is that your emotional life after 45 doesn't just go on. It can become even richer, more genuine, more powerful, not because you have all the answers, but because you've stopped seeking external validation. You don't need to prove anything to anyone anymore, and that, though it might seem small, is one of the deepest forms of freedom you'll ever experience. Yes, there are losses along the way, of connections, of certainties, even of versions of yourself that no longer feel true. But with every loss comes something new, a different way of loving yourself, a different desire for connection, a voice that no longer trembles when it says, "This isn't good for me anymore." And that voice, even if it took a while to arrive, becomes your best guide. It takes you away from the familiar. It puts you in front of tough decisions, but it also brings you back to yourself. There are moments when it might feel like you're going through all this alone, that no one really understands what you're dealing with, that your emotions are too much, or that you shouldn't be feeling this way. But the truth is, so many women are standing at that same crossroads. They just don't always say it out loud. That's why speaking up, sharing, and letting go of guilt is so powerful, because when one of us dares to speak her truth, she opens the door for others to do the same. Reclaiming your emotional life doesn't mean having it all under control. It means being willing to feel whatever comes without judging yourself. To give yourself permission to change your mind, to start over, to ask for help. It means letting go of the pressure to be perfect and beginning to treat yourself with more kindness. And yes, that includes allowing yourself to cry when you need to rest when you're worn out, and to say no without feeling like you're letting someone down. There is immense beauty in a woman who puts herself first, who no longer begs for affection, who refuses to settle for empty relationships, who doesn't need anyone to tell her she's enough. That woman is you, even if you forget it sometimes, even if insecurity shows up, even if you have days when everything feels like too much. Your power didn't vanish, it was just waiting for you to stop looking for it outside yourself. There's no magic formula for this emotional rebirth. Each woman lives it in her own way. Some find comfort in nature, others in art, in writing, in meditation, in dancing. What matters is that you reconnect with what makes you feel alive. Not just to entertain or distract yourself, but to truly inhabit your life. To remind yourself that your well-being isn't a luxury or some distant goal, it's an urgent need. At the end of the day, it's not about becoming who you used to be. It's about becoming who you're meant to be now. And that takes courage. It means letting go of roles that no longer fit you, creating space for new versions of yourself, even if you don't yet know what they'll look like. But that feeling of uncertainty is part of the process, because every true transformation begins in the unknown, in the emptiness that comes just before you bloom. So if you're there, caught in the middle of that emotional tide that no one else seems to understand, I just want to remind you of something. You're not alone, and you're not lost. You're on your way, a path that may be more intimate, more quiet, but also more real. And if you ever wonder whether you can still live a full emotional life, without judgment, without masks, without taboos, the answer is yes. Because it's never too late to come back to yourself, never too late to feel it all and choose you first.